What if I told you that one of the most beloved voices in Hollywood history kept a secret list, and the people on that list were terrified? Not terrified in a movie way, terrified in a real, life-changing, career-ending way. We are talking about a man so powerful that a single phone call from him could make a studio executive sweat through his suit. A man who once made sure someone never worked in this town again, just because they said the wrong thing at the wrong dinner table. Did you know that Frank Sinatra's rage was so well known that people inside Hollywood had a name for it? They called it getting Sinatra'd. And once it happened to you, you felt it for the rest of your life. Tonight, we are pulling back the curtain on the 5 people Frank Sinatra wanted completely gone from Hollywood, and the shocking reasons why. Number 1. Sammy Davis Jr., the friend he tried to destroy. Here is something that will completely change the way you think about the Rat Pack. We all grew up seeing those iconic photos. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., all laughing together, all arm in arm, all looking like the best of friends. Hollywood sold us that image for decades, but behind those beautiful black and white photos was something far uglier, far more complicated, and far more heartbreaking. Sammy Davis Jr. idolized Frank Sinatra. He genuinely loved the man. He looked up to him like a big brother. And Frank? Frank used that loyalty like a weapon. When Sammy Davis Jr. announced his engagement to actress Kim Novak in 1957, the reaction inside Hollywood was not a warm congratulations. It was a panic. Kim Novak was one of Columbia Pictures' biggest stars, and her boss, studio head Harry Cohn, was furious. He did not want his leading lady involved in an interracial relationship, and Harry Cohn reportedly reached out to people with serious connections to apply pressure, serious pressure, on Sammy to call the whole thing off. But here is the part that truly stings. According to multiple Hollywood insiders who spoke on the record over the years, Frank Sinatra did not step in to protect his so-called best friend. Instead, the pressure came from every direction at once. Sammy was reportedly told, in language that left no room for confusion, that his career and his personal safety were both on the line. Within weeks, Sammy Davis Jr. broke off the engagement with Kim Novak. He then, almost immediately, married a black singer named Lawford White in what many insiders described as a staged, rushed arrangement designed entirely to quiet the scandal. Lawford White herself later confirmed that the marriage was not a real love match. She said she was offered money. She said the whole thing felt like a business deal with a bow on top. Sammy never fully called out Sinatra by name during his lifetime, but in interviews late in his life, the hurt was visible on his face. You could see it. He talked around it carefully, like a man who had made peace with something he never actually forgave. Frank Sinatra smiled at Sammy Davis Jr. from every stage they shared. But when it mattered most, when Sammy needed the most powerful man in the room to stand up, that room went completely silent. That is what power looks like when it decides to look the other way. And Sammy Davis Jr. lived with that for the rest of his life. Number 2, Peter Lawford, the man he erased. If you want to understand how completely Frank Sinatra could remove someone from his world, look no further than Peter Lawford. Because Frank did not just end his friendship with Peter Lawford. He performed what people in Hollywood still call, to this day, one of the most total and devastating social executions the entertainment industry has ever seen. Peter Lawford was British, charming, good-looking, and married into the Kennedy family. His wife was Patricia Kennedy, sister to John F. Kennedy. That connection made Peter Lawford one of the most politically connected men in Hollywood. And for a while, Frank Sinatra absolutely loved having him around. Peter was part of the Rat Pack. He was on the inside. He was family, at least by Frank's definition of the word. Then came the incident that changed everything. In 1962, Frank Sinatra had spent an enormous amount of money and effort preparing his home in Palm Springs for a presidential visit. He wanted President John F. Kennedy to stay at his estate. He had a helipad built. He had phone lines installed. He was beyond excited. This was the ultimate validation for a kid from Hoboken, New Jersey. The President of the United States sleeping under his roof. But Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy had serious concerns about Frank's rumored connections to organized crime figures. He advised his brother against the stay, and President Kennedy, following that advice, chose to stay at Bing Crosby's home instead. The person who had to deliver that news to Frank Sinatra was Peter Lawford. By every account, Peter knew he was delivering a grenade. He made the call. He told Frank. And Frank Sinatra's response was not sadness. It was not disappointment. It was cold, instant, absolute rage. He reportedly told Peter Lawford that he was finished. Not finished as a friend, finished as a human being in Frank Sinatra's universe. Frank had the helipad torn up. He had photos of Peter Lawford removed from every room. He had his name removed from Rat Pack promotional materials. He refused to speak Peter's name in public. He told people around him to treat Peter as if he had simply never existed. Peter Lawford's career never truly recovered. His marriage to Patricia Kennedy eventually ended. He lost his connections, his status, and his place in the Hollywood circle that Frank Sinatra controlled. He passed away in 1984, having spent years on the outside of the world that had once made him feel invincible. Frank Sinatra did not attend the funeral. Number 3. Ed Sullivan. The Television War. Most people think of Frank Sinatra as a music legend, a movie star, a charming, tuxedo-wearing entertainer who could do no wrong. But in the late 1940s and early 1950s, Frank Sinatra was in serious trouble. His career had taken a dramatic fall. His records were not selling the way they once had. His personal life was a tabloid disaster, and the press, especially one powerful newspaper columnist turned television host, was absolutely piling on. Ed Sullivan was one of the most powerful men in American entertainment. His television show could make a career or quietly bury one. And Ed Sullivan had a very complicated, very public, very ugly relationship with Frank Sinatra. Sullivan had written critically about Sinatra in his newspaper column during Frank's rough years. He questioned Frank's character. He commented on the scandal surrounding Frank's affair with Ava Gardner while he was still married to his first wife. For Frank Sinatra, a man who viewed loyalty as the highest human virtue, these columns were not just criticisms. They were declarations of war. Frank reportedly told people in his circle that Ed Sullivan was a man without integrity. He avoided the Sullivan Show for years, even as appearing on it would have helped his visibility during his career slump. The idea of sitting across from Ed Sullivan, smiling for the camera, was something Frank found genuinely unbearable. What makes this story so fascinating is the power dynamic underneath it. Ed Sullivan had the television platform. Frank had the loyalty of the streets, the loyalty of the music world, and eventually, after his career renaissance with From Here to Eternity in 1953. The loyalty of Hollywood itself. When Frank came roaring back to the top, the balance of power shifted completely. The feud quietly fizzled over time, but insiders who were around both men said the cold politeness between them was always thick with unspoken history. Frank never forgot. Frank never truly forgave. He simply moved on when it served him, and the Sullivan chapter became just one more chapter in the long book of people Frank Sinatra had decided were beneath his regard. Number 4, Marilyn Monroe, the loyalty he demanded. Did you know that Frank Sinatra and Marilyn Monroe were connected in ways that Hollywood never fully wanted the public to understand? Their relationship was complicated, layered, and at certain points genuinely uncomfortable for everyone around them. After Marilyn Monroe's marriage to Joe DiMaggio ended, Frank Sinatra moved into her orbit in a significant way. They were seen together. They were rumored to be romantically involved at various points. Frank admired her enormously, but Frank's version of admiration always came with conditions, and Marilyn Monroe was not a woman who responded well to conditions. The tension between them escalated into something genuinely disturbing in November 1954. Private investigator Fred Otash and a group of men allegedly connected to Frank Sinatra and Joe DiMaggio raided an apartment in Los Angeles, believing Marilyn Monroe was inside with someone she should not have been with. They broke down the door. They were completely wrong about which apartment Marilyn was in. An innocent woman named Florence Coates, who had absolutely nothing to do with any of this, was terrified out of her mind when strange men burst through her door in the middle of the night. This event became known as the Wrong Door Raid, and it was one of the ugliest, most embarrassing incidents Frank Sinatra was ever associated with. He was eventually called before a California state legislative committee to answer questions about his involvement. He denied knowing about the raid in advance. Most people who studied the incident closely did not find that answer particularly convincing. What this story really reveals is how Frank Sinatra's possessiveness, his need to control the people in his circle, sometimes crossed lines that had no business being crossed. Marilyn Monroe was not a possession, she was a person, and the people around her, including Frank, sometimes seemed to forget that completely. Number 5, Frank Costello and the Line Between Two Worlds. Here is where the story gets the darkest, because everything else on this list, the feuds, the betrayals, the erased friendships, those were all about ego and loyalty and pride. But this final story is about something much more serious. It is about the line between Hollywood glamour and organized crime. And it is about whether Frank Sinatra truly understood where that line was, or whether he simply did not care. Frank Sinatra grew up in Hoboken, New Jersey. He grew up surrounded by men who operated outside the law. And as he rose to fame, those connections did not disappear. They followed him. Men like Frank Costello, the powerful organized crime figure known as the Prime Minister of the Underworld, existed in the same social circles where Frank Sinatra moved freely. The FBI maintained a file on Frank Sinatra for decades. That file documented his associations with known organized crime figures going back to the 1940s. It was not a thin file. It was not a file full of vague suspicions. It was detailed, specific, and deeply concerning to law enforcement officials who watched Frank's world from the outside. When Frank Sinatra applied for a gaming license in Nevada in the early 1960s, the issues around his associations became a public scandal. Nevada gaming authorities pressured him intensely about his relationship with Sam Giancana, the Chicago organized crime boss. Frank refused to distance himself. He reportedly found the whole investigation insulting. He felt that his personal friendships were his own business and that no government agency had the right to tell him who he could and could not know. He eventually surrendered his gaming license rather than cut ties with the people he considered friends. Think about what that means for a moment. Frank Sinatra, at the absolute peak of his Hollywood power, beloved, wealthy, celebrated everywhere he went, chose loyalty to men connected to organized crime over the business interests that were making him even wealthier. That is not a business decision. That is a code. It is a value system that Frank Sinatra carried from the streets of Hoboken all the way to the stages of Las Vegas and the dinner tables of the Kennedy White House. And that code, that fierce, uncompromising loyalty to certain people, combined with total ruthlessness toward others, is the thread that connects every single name on this list. Frank Sinatra did not see the world the way most people do. He saw it in two categories: people who were with him completely, and people who were not. If you were in the second category, you were already gone. You just did not know it yet. What Frank Sinatra built in Hollywood was not just a career. It was a kingdom with invisible walls and very real consequences for anyone who crossed them. The five people we just talked about all learned the same lesson in very different ways. That Frank's friendship was one of the most valuable things in the entertainment world, and Frank's anger was one of the most dangerous. The fascinating thing is that none of this made people love him less. If anything, the power, the edge, the darkness underneath the charm, that is exactly what made Frank Sinatra impossible to look away from. If this video opened your eyes even a little, hit that like button right now and subscribe so you never miss another one of these. Because coming up next on this channel, we are going inside the one Hollywood scandal, so massive, so buried, and so completely protected by powerful people that most of you have never heard the full story. You will want to be there for that one.